General Hospital, spoilers reveal that the storm outside the Quartermain mansion had clawed its way into the walls, vibrating through the old beams and echoing like a warning neither Charlotte nor Danny fully understood. The wind howled against the windows as if demanding entry, but inside the wide hallways, another kind of turbulence was forming, quiet, dangerous, and far more intimate. Charlotte had always sensed something unsettling about the house. Not in a supernatural way, but in the feeling that every surface, every portrait, every locked drawer carried a weight of secrets that stretched far back into generations. Those secrets had been whispering to her ever since she arrived, but she had never expected to come so close to one that would change how she saw not only the Quartermains, but also herself. She and Danny had followed the faint smell of smoke toward the kitchen, thinking someone might need help. Instead, they found themselves frozen behind a partially open door, listening to the escalating argument between Tracy and Martin, an argument that peeled back layers of the family's history in a way neither of them could have imagined. Charlotte pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow the pounding of her heart as Tracy's voice rose sharply, filled with frustration and fear rather than simple irritation. Danny leaned closer, trying to make sense of Martin's accusations about manipulated access, stolen keys, and the use of Scout as an unwilling pawn. For Danny, all of it sounded like familiar Quartermain chaos, grown-ups fighting over control inheritance, family artifacts, and whatever else they used to assert their dominance within the tangled branches of their dynasty. But for Charlotte, the tone of the argument, especially the tremor in Tracy's voice, stirred something darker. She did not know why the words struck her so deeply. She only knew that this was more than a fight over heirlooms or authority. This was about something hidden. Something Tracy had been guarding so fiercely that even Martin's presence in the house pushed her toward panic. As Charlotte listened, she felt a cold certainty forming in her gut, the kind that made the entire hallway seem to shrink around her. Tracy spoke of adjustments, of things that had been altered recently, and the phrasing made Charlotte stiffen. Adjustments was not a word people used casually. It carried a clinical edge, a precision that made her think of medical files, rewritten histories, revised wills, and manipulated narratives that benefited only the powerful. The more she tried to convince herself that she was overreacting, the more her instincts rebelled. She felt Danny's hand on her arm, grounding her, but it did nothing to quell the sense that the storm inside her was gaining momentum. Danny, ever rational, recognized that Charlotte was reacting more intensely than the situation seemed to warrant. Yet he also knew she had been spiraling emotionally for weeks. The resentment toward Nina, the fear of abandonment, the growing tension with Valentin, all of it had paved the way for moments like this, moments that twisted her emotions into sharp, unpredictable angles. And discovering that Tracy might be hiding yet another Quartermain secret only intensified the fragile turmoil. Charlotte tried desperately to control. As she leaned closer, the words spilling from the open doorway seemed to wrap around her mind like a tightening vine. She heard Martin accuse Tracy of hiding something that concerned the entire family. Something she refused to release because doing so would force her to face consequences she had spent years avoiding. The idea that someone like Tracy, unyielding, influential, intimidating, could be afraid of the truth made Charlotte's pulse speed up. If someone that powerful was terrified of what might come out, what did that mean for the rest of them? And why out of everyone in the world? Did Charlotte suddenly feel as though this secret hovered dangerously close to her own life? Danny tried to analyze. Martin's tone picking up on inconsistencies, trying to map out the logic. He assumed it was about some long-buried Quartermain scandal, an altered will, a hidden child, a misappropriation of family property. Quartermains had centuries worth of drama tied to their name, but Charlotte was not thinking like Danny. She was thinking like someone who had spent her entire life watching adults reshape the truth to suit their needs. Betrayal had become a language she understood too well, and hearing it echo through the mansion triggered old wounds she had never healed from. Every uncertain moment with Valentin, every revelation about Nina, every time she had felt like a pawn in someone else's choices, now all of it swirled together until the boundary between Tracy's secret and her own anxieties faded completely. The word adjustment repeated in Charlotte's mind like a drumbeat. She began to imagine scenarios she could not articulate, files altered to protect reputations. Lineage records, quietly edited personal histories, rewritten to ensure certain children belonged and others did not. She wondered if her increasing emotional volatility, something even she could barely understand, was connected to something much larger happening around her. Had someone lied to her about her history, about her family? Was she somehow affected by a decision adults had made? Without considering the consequences for her mental state and identity, the very possibility shook her. It made the shadows in the hallway feel heavier, as if the house itself were reacting to her thoughts. Danny sensed her growing distress and wanted to pull her away, but Charlotte could not leave. Not yet. She needed to hear more to confirm the vague dread building inside her. Tracy's next words solidified her fear, whatever the older woman was hiding. It was not just an ordinary family squabble. Tracy mentioned something about recent changes, mistakes that needed correcting. and the urgency she expressed made Charlotte feel as though she had wandered into the center of a labyrinth she had no map for. Danny, although steady, could not ignore the implication that Tracy was terrified of what would happen if the truth escaped. He knew enough about the Quartermaines to understand that their secrets were rarely harmless. But even he could feel the shift in Charlotte, a shift from curiosity to something closer to obsession. Charlotte did not fully understand why she felt so implicated in a fight that had nothing to do with her, at least on the surface. But the sensation refused to leave. It was as if she had been unknowingly standing on a fault line for months. And this argument was the first tremor, revealing just how unstable the ground beneath her had become. The idea that Tracy might be adjusting records, manipulating legacies, or reshaping the family's past awakened a terrifying question Charlotte could not silence if adults were capable of. Rewriting the truth so completely. What else might they have rewritten, and had they done something that affected her without her knowledge? The wind outside roared harder, rattling the windows like an omen. Charlotte straightened slowly, pulling herself back from the door. Even though her mind clung to every final syllable drifting through the air, she felt altered, as if the information she overheard had peeled back a layer of innocence she did not even realize she still possessed. Danny watched her, realizing they were stepping into territory neither of them could navigate alone. The secret Tracy held was still nameless, still shapeless, yet it had already begun reshaping Charlotte from the inside, triggering a quiet but powerful shift that would follow her long after the storm ended. As they retreated down the hallway, the mansion seemed to breathe around them, walls tightening, floors creaking, air cooling in a way that made Charlotte's skin prickle. She knew nothing concrete, and yet she felt everything. She understood instinctively that whatever changes Tracy feared were already happening, weaving themselves into the fabric of the Quartermaine family and bleeding outward into the lives of anyone connected to them. And Charlotte, standing at the edge of her own unraveling, was no longer sure whether she had simply overheard a secret or whether she had just awakened one inside herself. She walked beside Danny, not with certainty, but with the awareness that something irreversible had begun. Whatever truth Tracy was protecting, whatever adjustment had been made, it had already seeped into Charlotte's consciousness, anchoring itself as a new obsession she would not be able to let go of. And in the quiet that followed, she felt the first pulse of a transformation she could neither understand nor control, one that would soon intertwine her fate with the darkest parts of the Quartermaine legacy, whether she was ready or not. Charlotte had always grown up in the shadow of powerful adults, people who shaped the world around her, while expecting her to adapt, conform, and quietly absorb the consequences of their choices. But after overhearing Tracy and Martin's confrontation in the Quartermaine mansion, something had shifted inside her with the precision of a gear clicking into place. The adjustment she felt was not sudden nor chaotic. Instead, it came with a chilling sense of clarity, as if she had finally recognized a force that had been pressing on her for months. For the first time, she understood that she could not continue living as a passive observer in a world that kept reshaping itself. Without her consent, if the adults could rewrite legacies, alter narratives, and protect their interests with ruthless precision, then she, too, was entitled to make adjustments of her own, ones that served her goals, her needs. And the person she was becoming, and her first instinct, sharp as a blade forged in secrecy, was to reclaim something for Valentin. Not out of obligation, but out of a fierce sense of loyalty that had been twisted by confusion, guilt, and longing. Valentin had been the one anchor in her turbulent life, the person she wanted to protect even when she did not know how. But recent months had fractured that bond, leaving her suspended between resentment and devotion. Now, after hearing that the Quartermaines were making secretive changes that affected more than just their own family, she felt an urgency growing inside her. If they were altering histories, adjusting records, concealing truths, then what was to stop them from reshaping Valentin's world too? She imagined a future where his claims, his connections, his rights, even the role he played in her life could be quietly diminished under the weight of Quartermaine influence. Her adjustment became simple and absolute. She would find a way to restore what belonged to him, even if she did not yet fully understand what that meant. This silent vow became the seed of her new transformation. It was not a reckless impulse, but a calculated intention building, momentum inside her like a storm forming at sea. The emotions that had once scattered her thoughts were now concentrating into a single directive: reclaim control. And control required distance from Port Charles, from Valentin's worried eyes, from Nina's fractured trust. And especially from the Quartermaine mansion where her newfound awareness had begun. So, Charlotte disappeared. Not out of fear, but because disappearing was a strategy. It allowed her space to think, to plan, to observe without scrutiny. Her absence created panic around her, but panic, she realized, was a form of power. It changed adults' behavior. It forced them to reveal what they would otherwise conceal. And it allowed Charlotte to understand who truly cared, who feared exposure, and who might be working against Valentin in ways even he could not see. Her disappearance was the adjustment no one anticipated. It was not rebellion, it was rebalancing. She felt a strange calm as she watched events unfold from afar, search parties organizing Valentin unraveling. Police reports multiplying, Port Charles consumed by speculation. The reaction validated her intuition. The world moved differently when she removed herself from it. And in that movement, truths began surfacing. She saw how quickly suspicion turned toward the wrong people. How easily narrative shifted when the person at the center of the story was not there to defend themselves. It confirmed what she had always sensed: control was not something given, it was something seized. But disappearing had consequences she had not foreseen. The longer she stayed hidden, the more she felt the weight of her own transformation. This adjustment, she had embraced this desire to reshape her life, and Valentin's future began evolving into something deeper, something harder to restrain. The secrecy thrilled her, giving her a sense of autonomy she had never experienced. Yet at the same time, it isolated her, sharpening her thoughts into dangerous edges. The more she observed from the outside, the more she began to question the roles everyone played in her life. Were they truly trying to help her, or simply trying to shape her into what they needed? Was Valentin her protector, or another adult who believed control was his right alone? These questions fueled the fire growing inside her. Each one pushed her further from the girl she had been and closer to someone new, someone who would not be easily dismissed or contained. The adjustment was no longer just about restoring Valentin's rights. It was about defining her own place in the world, unbound by expectations. Every step she took away from Port Charles deepened this evolution, turning her disappearance into something much more significant than a moment of crisis. It became an awakening. But the more she changed, the more the world around her fractured. Valentin grew increasingly frantic, convinced something terrible had happened. Nina spiraled into guilt, believing Charlotte's disappearance was a punishment for past mistakes. Even those who barely knew Charlotte felt the ripple effects, because a missing child, especially one with Cassadine blood, was never merely a missing child. It was a sign, a warning, and in this case, it was the first indicator that the adjustments happening behind closed doors were no longer limited to the Quartermaines. Charlotte herself had become part of the shifting landscape, a catalyst whose actions would bring long-buried truths to light. Her transformation was no longer a private evolution, but a turning point for everyone connected to her. And the farther she traveled from the safety of Valentin's reach, the clearer it became that this adjustment, this deep internal shift, was still unfolding. Her disappearance was not the end of something, but the beginning of a new alignment. One that would challenge familial loyalties, expose hidden histories, and force those who loved her to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Charlotte had begun as a girl desperate for stability. Now she was becoming something far more unpredictable, someone who understood the power of withholding, the weight of secrets, and the leverage that came with controlling her own narrative. And as she disappeared deeper into the night, the world behind her trembled under the realization that Charlotte was no longer simply reacting to the adjustments of others. She was creating adjustments of her own, and the consequences of those actions were only just beginning to unfold.